all you hardcore boxing fans out there. How are you doing? It's Russ here from Porky's Corner. Well, welcome back, Julian, friend of the pod. How are you doing, Julian?
All good, Russell. Not spoken. Well, we spoke offline, but we've not spoke on Porky's Corner for a while, mate, have we?
Yeah, are you all right?
Yeah, all good. I had flu at Christmas, just like everybody else. Not man flu, but it was horrendous. So I'm still getting over that. I'm not somebody who's poorly, actually. I'm never poorly. So it was a bit rubbish, and it kind of like put a bit of a dampener over Christmas. But I'm fine now, mate. Absolutely fine. I'm just wanting to do a bit of training soon, get into a little bit of shape again. So once the chest clears, I'll be on that bag every night.
Oh, that's good, isn't it? That's good. A lot been going on in boxing. Well, not a lot of fighting, but a lot of talking. The big news today, and it's on a few outlets. Joshua's going to fight in April against Dempsey McKean, an Australian, who Tony Sims has been training. What do you think to that? Rank 52 on BoxRec.
Well, obviously, you know me, Russell. I've got a lot of thoughts on that. First of all, I don't know if you can see me because I can only see your thumbnail.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. So it's interesting you got a thumbnail of AJ. Those belts out there right now, are they?
I thought it were about Undisputed.
All roads lead to Undisputed, not Dempsey McKean, apparently.
Like Peter McNeely, innit? Peter McNeely job, innit?
Do you know what? I've got so many thoughts on that. It won't surprise you to know. I mean, first of all, I'm going to be open. I'm not going to put Dempsey down. Genuinely not going to put him down.
Well, no one has put him down, Julian.
Well, he's unbeaten, but this says more about me than it does about the modern sort of scope of heavyweight boxing, because I don't follow it as much as I used to. So when you sent me this kind of update and said this is who AJ is fighting, I'd never heard of him. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I'd never heard of him. So naturally at lunchtime, did a bit of digging, had a quick 10 minutes, watched a couple of rounds of his fights, and that was enough. And my conclusion is they could probably dig Jack Dempsey back up and he'd give AJ a better fight. But it's an exercise in getting him out there and getting him with a win on his record and trying to repackage Anthony Joshua. That one of the issues I've got, okay, is listen, I've said before, I said it about the Fury Chisora fight. Yeah. I've got no issue with people having an easy night. The only issue I've got with people having an easy night is if they fight once or twice a year. Now, Dempsey McKean or whatever he's called, AJ, if they're talking about April, does Anthony Joshua need a massive training camp to get ready for a kid like that? Do they need to build this fight up? You know,
he's just 32.
It's ridiculous, mate.
You mean a fighter like that, yeah.
Well, if you imagine, all right, if you imagine a prime Mike Tyson, I'm not going to go back as far back as I often go. Mike Tyson in his first year was fighting every 2 weeks as a pro. And some of these guys who were knocking over were guys like Dempsey McKean. So anybody who's listening to this now, don't think about his unbeaten record, because what we know, Russell, is unbeaten records mean nothing. It's not how many fights you've had and how many fights you've won. It's who you beat or who you've boxed and when you beat them. That's all that matters in boxing. So I scanned a couple of comments where people were saying on IFL, they were saying, oh, no, he's 22-0. Have you not heard of him? You know, have you been living in a cave? And I'm thinking, it means absolutely nothing. And I'm sure Dennis will tell you the same thing. You get these kids who are 15, 16-0, and they haven't beaten anybody whatsoever.
Let me just jump in here and tell you a story. Me and Dennis went somewhere years ago. This is 2016, I think it was 17, might even been 15, to look at this kid who was 25-0, and I swear to God, they wouldn't have even given him a license in this country. He was 25-0. So it doesn't mean no, does it?
Means absolutely nothing. So what you got to look at with Dempsey, okay, you got to say, well, first of all, he's no amateur experience. He's done a bit of MMA, a bit of Thai boxing, and that's his background. He turned pro at about 24, 25 years old, so he was quite a late starter. In 8 years, 22 fights might sound a lot, but at the low level he's been boxing, it's a joke. He should be out every 3 or 4 weeks. So he's massively inexperienced. But what we've got here, right, in simple terms, you know how boxing works and the scripts that are done behind the scenes. It's WWE. What you've got is, I watched Rocky 2 the other night. I love those films. They're good fun. And when I watched it reminded me of the first Rocky, the original Rocky in whatever, 1977. And when the guy pulled out against Apollo Creed, and then obviously Stallone or Rocky got his opportunity, what Apollo Creed said was, every fight, okay, if you haven't got a competitive fight, you need an angle. You need a unique selling point. So this fight needs a unique selling point, because we all know we can't take this seriously as a competitive match. No matter what we think about AJ's limitations, and no matter what the record shows us, this is not a competitive fight. So going back to what Apollo Creed says, it needs an angle. And I'm telling you now, and you've heard it here first, the angle that we're going to hear about this for the next few weeks, if indeed this fight does come off, is Tony Sims trains McKean. Now, Tony Sims, he really did all the work with AJ in those impressionable years. It wasn't Rob McCracken, it was Tony Sims who did all that graft. Nobody knows Anthony Joshua better than Tony Sims. Yeah. And that's the angle that they're going to use, is that Tony Sims has got the inside track on AJ. He knows what it takes to beat him. And you and I know they're going to do that. And we also know that it's one of those conversations which is, all right, McKean lives down the road from Eddie, probably washes his car on a lunchtime or something like that. And they probably just, look, do you want to fight? We need an easy fight for AJ to come back. We'll give you the best payday you've ever had. You're at an age, really, in a stage where nobody really knows who you are, and you're probably 3 to 4 years away from getting any kind of meaningful fight at heavyweight. Do you fancy $500,000 or whatever for getting put on your backside? And it ticks all the boxes, Russell.
Yeah, it does, yeah. It's madness, isn't it?
It's madness. I just don't understand, and this is because I struggle with the pace of heavyweight boxing. Now, the fight once or twice a year. What I'm frustrated at is, when did AJ last box? When did Usyk beat him? I can't remember.
Well, AJ's had 6 fights in 5 years.
So it's a joke, isn't it? He's very talented.
That much. He's got that many sponsors to keep happy. He can't fit camps, and I've been told.
That wouldn't surprise me also. Yeah, and where's the pace? If he really wants to be the best he can be, he should be fighting every 6 to 8 weeks. And it was Eddie who said when he got beat by Usyk the second time, he's been under too much pressure. He's had the big stadium fights, the big arena fights, and every fight he's had has been pay-per-view, etc., etc. So why don't they just drop him down half a level? Put him on the big shows, put him on as chief support. Look, I know his ego wouldn't take that, and I'm talking nonsense, but this is what I would do. And I'd have him out every 6 weeks. And it wouldn't bother me then if he was fighting the Dempsey McKeans of this world. What bothers me is he's going to fight in April now, so he's going to need 12, 13, 14 weeks to get ready for a 2-round fight. And then we're going to wait another 6 months before he boxes. And he'll be pushing, what will he be pushing then? 34, 35. And it's just a joke. And I just don't think, I think heavyweights, more than anybody, they get paid way too much. I'm talking the elite heavyweights, they get paid way too much to motivate them to want to be out any more than twice a year.
Do you think there should be a salary cap?
Well, Dana White, I mean, I know it's changed slightly the way that the UFC is structured, but Dana White has a lot of his top fighters on contract, and they have a salary cap. Russell, I know Conor McGregor, because he was huge, he kind of broke that salary cap. But when the Chuck Liddells and the Tito Ortizes and Shamrocks were all signed up to the UFC, they were told who they were fighting, when they were fighting, and they were capped. I can't remember, it was capped at about 250 grand or something. And it just keeps you just keen enough, doesn't it, to want to keep earning and to be accustomed to that lifestyle. I mean, Anthony Joshua and his kids probably never have to work a day in their life. So what is Anthony Joshua's motivation right now? I don't know, but I'd be just screaming and shouting and saying, I want to be out routinely. I want to be out every 6 weeks. I want to be out every 8 weeks. And I don't care how much you're going to pay me. And anybody who thinks, I'm talking nonsense and, these fights are too big and you have to pay AJ a certain amount. You have to pay AJ what he asked for. And maybe he's asking for too much, but just give an example, Russell. One example. So when Gary Sykes, I mentioned Sykes again. When Gary Sykes beat Kai Johansson, he got about 18 grand or something like that. Now, I needed him out before he fought Buckland, who was a mandatory. I needed him out. Sykes boxed at Huddersfield Town Hall. He was a reigning British champion. He just boxed for 18.5 grand. And I got him a 6-rounder. I begged Chris Aston, put him on a small 6-rounder, and I think he got about 800 quid in ticket money. This is a reigning British champion. What's the point? The point is it keeps fighters active, it keeps them sharp, and I think in between big fights are important, and I think schedules are important. And that's one of the problems that we've got now with boxing is inactivity at the highest level. And I think that's one of the reasons why Canelo Alvarez has been so successful, because Alvarez has continued to learn his craft. He's always in the gym, and maybe not as much in the last year, perhaps, but Canelo Alvarez was always active, and he'd have 3 to 4 big fights a year. And it's just not something you see now. And maybe it's just because the networks can't afford what they're asking for. Well, then, I don't know what's important, being a fighter, legacy, or earning money. And of course, it's earning money, isn't it?
Yeah, Joshua's a very greedy man. I've heard all sorts of rumours. Some I'm not going to put on here because it's personal time we won't want me to, but he's obsessed. He's obsessed. Do you know when he goes to Dubai, they fly him out there? Dubai tourism, they fly him out, don't they, on a plane and that? Put him up in an hotel that looks like a sail, doesn't it? Put him up there. He's got it made.
How much money do people need, seriously? Maybe it's just my outlook's not like that. I'm not money driven.
It was about the UK though, wasn't it? And about belts.
Oh yeah, it's always about the belts, isn't it? It's always about the UK fans until somebody else comes in and offers double the money. And people would turn around, listen to me and you and say, hang on a minute, you wouldn't say no. But my answer is always the same. Don't judge me on that, what you would do.
Didn't Fury say it were about America, and then once he lost his visa, what did he say?
It's about the UK fans. It's all about bringing boxing home, and people buy this stuff, don't they? People absolutely they buy into it, and I don't know. I'm stuck in the past, I am, and that's because I prefer the past where boxing's concerned. I'm not stuck in the past in life. I am in boxing, and I just think there's a balance, isn't there? Fighting's a dangerous sport. We know that it's the most dangerous sport there is, and fighters have to, they have to protect themselves because ultimately at the end of the career, no one's going to care for them. But I'm not talking about guys who are earning 30, 40 grand a fight or 800 quid a fight or whatever. We're actually talking about people now like the Furies and the Joshuas, guys who earn between 25 and 40 million pound a fight. It's like, how much money do you need, and how important is it for you to? You never hear now, Russell. I'm going back now, but we have records in boxing, don't we? You never hear any heavyweight now say, I'm going to beat Joe Lewis's record of the most title defenses. Why don't heavyweights talk in that sense? Because if you really talk about legacy, you really want to talk about legacy, then what do? You go after records, don't you? And as we all know, Joe Lewis had 25 successful title defenses. When do you ever hear heavyweights now saying, Floyd was all about the 50-0, wasn't he? It was questionable how he got to that, but Floyd Mayweather was a great, great fighter, little doubt about that. But when do you ever hear any heavyweight now saying, I'm going to beat Rocky Marciano's heavyweight record of 49-0? You don't hear it, do you? I'm going to beat Joe Lewis's record for most title defenses. I'm going to beat, George Foreman's for most KOs, etc., etc. You don't hear people chasing records. So you're either chasing legacy and you want to go down in history, or you're not. Which one is it?
Well, it's about money for them now. They want to mop up what they can while going's good, because he can walk at any time, can't he? As soon as he loses some more sponsors, he'll walk. And I think British fans, when they see a fight like this, and this might not even be in UK, they could go into Australia with it, couldn't they? We don't know, do we? Do you know what I
Could
mean?
go anywhere, couldn't they? But what they will do, there's two things they'll do. They'll build it up with an angle, which is the angle I've talked about, which is perhaps the Tony Sims angle, or AJ struggles with southpaws and blah blah blah. It's a bit late to be fighting southpaws now, by the way. There's that aspect of it, and then the second thing that we know, they're going to charge people for this, aren't they? This will be pay-per-view.
Will McCracken be in corner?
Who knows? Who knows who's going to be in the corner, because we know that AJ, AJ's a talented fighter. I'm not suggesting he's not, but we know that Joshua psychologically is very, very fragile. He likes people around him who's going to tell him what he wants to hear. And it's just interesting that he didn't even bed in with his last coach, did he? And now he's looking for other coaches. Who is he even training with? Does anybody know? What is he even doing at the moment? What is he working on? I got no idea. And the one thing that I'm always curious about is everybody keeps saying that AJ needs to go back to being the killer that he was early in his career. What I will point out is early in AJ's career, he was knocking over, well, nobody's really. And ultimately, like most fighters, it happens to most fighters, when you step up, the fights get harder and the fights go longer. But let's not forget, when people say AJ needs to go into that killer mode, Anthony Joshua can't sustain killer mode, and he never could. Whenever he lets his hands go, he needs 3 or 4 rounds just to recover and to fill the tank back up. And we saw that once again, didn't we? With the Usyk fight in the 9th round, when he emptied the tank again and there was no recovery whatsoever. So AJ doesn't need a new coach. AJ needs probably something that we can't give him right now.
What do you think about his search for a trainer? Do you know what I mean? He's on like a world tour, isn't he?
It reminds me, and Oscar De La Hoya was like such a fantastic fighter, a brilliant fighter was De La Hoya. But De La Hoya did the same thing, didn't he? He went through a phase of just going through all these celebrity trainers. And I remember when he fought Manny Pacquiao, and he had this dream team. They did the 24/7 series, like it was a brilliant series. That, and
Mayweather's dad won it.
He had Floyd Senior, then he had Nacho, and he had this, and he had all these, the cream of coaching, but you never actually saw any improvements in his boxing, did you? It's almost like an ego thing. Like with AJ, it's like an ego thing. I want the most well-known coach who's going to make me look good and is going to give me that kind of X factor. But nobody ever looks at themselves, do they? No one ever hears anything about McCracken, what the job McCracken did with him, and maybe even Tony Sims. You just now, it's almost as well. It's like looking for someone to blame, isn't it? And you've heard me say this so many times. When Larry Holmes was in the corner and he went back, Eddie Futch gave him a drink, but there's not a lot you could tell Larry Holmes what he needed to do during a fight, because he had what's called ring IQ, and of course he had massive experience, and he had a natural fighting instinct, did Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes was very comfortable in the heat of battle. Ali was comfortable when battle became really, really hard. Those guys always looked relaxed.
When they were in the furnace, they were firefighters, weren't they?
Absolutely, and they never, ever panicked.
I'm the breakfast boy. And I mean that to any man out there who thinks he can take John Fury. Because I'm the best fighter out there. There's nobody can beat me. Because I'm willing to die and give me life and get 35 years before I lose. I'm an extremely violent man when it comes down to the old fisticuffs, because I'll do anything I can to win. And I call street fighting. It's a dangerous job. And I'm a dangerous dude. Unbeaten. Step in my face, hell coming to breakfast, mate, because I know I can fight. And I'm a dangerous mother, believe me. I'm the real deal, mate. And that goes out to anybody who thinks they can take me today or any other day. It's finished in one way. Them splattered up the floor and the head kicked off.
But whenever Anthony Joshua has been in a really...
Frazier didn't panic as well, did they?
They didn't panic. They stuck to what they were doing. They were natural fighters. But what we saw with Joshua was he panics, doesn't he? You can see his eyes widen. And Joshua, when he's been in difficult times during his career, like we first saw it with Klitschko, he absolutely panics and his chest comes out and he hyperventilates. And then, I've mentioned this so many times, but when he went back to the corner after Ruiz dropped him, and he was saying to Rob McCracken, and now what do I do? And what's he going to do? And what do I have to do? It was like a coaching lesson in the corner. It was absolutely bizarre. So that tells me that he's had massive success as Joshua, but He's not a natural fighter. He's a natural athlete. He can hit hard, and of course, he's won a gold medal and world titles, etc. But when I'm talking about a natural fighter, I'm talking about natural survival instinct. So if you think of Tyson Fury, every single Tyson Fury's time he's been dropped, Tyson Fury has those natural instincts what to do.
Yeah.
And we used to see with Frank Bruno, didn't he? Whenever Frank Bruno got hurt, it was game over because Bruno didn't have those natural recovery powers or recuperative powers either. And AJ is exactly the same. As soon as AJ starts to get hurt, starts to get vulnerable, there is no coach in the world what can give him what he wants. And I think that's the problem, Russell.
Yeah.
I think he's looking for a coach to give him the natural fighting and natural survival instincts, and they're just not there. They are not there.
It's like when Froch got downed against Groves, our second row, you could hear a pin drop, right? You know what happened? You know when favourite?
Oh, it was a hell of a shot.
Early, very early. It all goes quiet, don't you? Like only ever time I've ever experienced that. Well, when Derry Matthews dropped Tommy Coyle.
Oh, that left hook from hell. It was
Oh my God! He just went silent. He definitely lowered the boom that night. And George Groves did as well. That I'd never seen it like close up like that. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, somebody that you want to win, and he's a mate, and that, and it's so God knows what it's like for a trainer if it happens to a fighter. And you're closer than anybody, aren't you? It must be horrible.
I've been there, and that's the thing is when you train in amateurs or you train in pros, there are certain fighters who you know when they get in trouble, you worry what's going to happen, and then there are other fighters who get in trouble. And as I've said about the Fury kind of like comparison, there's just something about certain. Listen, you never want to see your fighter get dropped. It's not a good thing, but there was something about certain fighters that when they get dropped, they have a look what says, I've got it under control. I mean, Ray Leonard was exactly the same when Kevin Howard dropped him for the first time. He kind of had that smirk on his face. And then when Donny Lalonde dropped him, I never had a sense that they were going to lose that fight. And I never had that sense. And sometimes with fighters, when they get dropped early on, I just think, it's going to be a tough moment for them, but they're going to get through this. And I think I had exactly the same thing when I watched Cal Froch. I mean, Groves really squared him up with that right hand, didn't he? He really caught him so square. But there was just something about Carl's toughness and Carl's recuperative powers that you almost think he's going to be all right, But there's something
against Taylor, didn't it? Happened against Taylor.
He's been there, he's done it, he knows how to deal with it. Larry Holmes was exactly the same. Some fighters get dropped a certain way. I mean, Amir Khan was one. When Amir Khan used to get dropped, you had that kind of sense of worry, what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Often he did go on to win, thankfully. But there's something about Anthony Joshua, and this is what I'm saying, the coach can't give him that. But it's a good point you've said, because I remember when Carl Johansson dropped Sykes in the 8th, and it was a right hand that would have dropped an elephant. It was a massive shot. And Sykes went down, and I could hear the shot, and it whistled through the air, and
Carl was a massive puncher in one of Johansson, wasn't he?
Carl Johansson used to spar down at my gym, and they used to spar with Josh Warrington and Sykes and Terry Flanagan and Tommy Coyle. You can imagine what those spars were like. They all came from Hull and from Manchester, from Leeds, and we used to have some fantastic nights. And Carl Johansson, this is absolutely true, is this. When Carl was down at Central Boxing Club and we had those fantastic sparring nights, Josh Warrington, Terry Flanagan, Tommy Coyle and Sykes, all of them, they had massive respect for Carl, but they used to be so switched on because they could hit each other and they could be reckless and careless and there was no danger. But there were times when Carl Johansson would launch in sparring, like right hands. Honestly, Russell, I'm cringing thinking about them. He used to launch these right hands and sometimes they'd just go past Josh Warrington's chin. And Josh would just say, oh, that'd have hit me. Over had I gone. And they used to cringe at Carl Johansson's power. And punches, honestly, Russell, punches are just something else because they're always in with a shout. And Carl was just the same. And I remember when he dropped Sykes, this is actually true, and Sykes said the same thing. Gary was kind of in control of the fight. Carl hit Gary that hard and hit him, dropped him that hard. He actually woke him up. watched the fight a few months ago, and it was a savage right hand, and he hit him that hard, it literally woke him up. And that sometimes can happen with thudding punches. I know we've gone off track, but it's just the side of boxing, isn't it? It's a really good point when you said it must be
tough men see it through now. When Froch got dropped against Taylor, I was like, because I've never seen it, and you never know what's going to happen, do you? And he chased him down after that. He just went after him and walked through him and walked him down. And he did the same with Groves, but Groves were in control for 6.5 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? But after he emptied his tank after 6.
But ultimately, fights are over. People always say about Lennox Lewis and Frank Bruno, but Bruno was beating Lewis. Championship fights are over 12 rounds, aren't they? Ultimately,
that's why I feel a little bit sorry for Groves, because maybe it come a bit too early for him. But if you look at in the 7th round, all you Cobra fans go into 7th round, and he hits the Cobra, and Cobra gives him a look, and that look is if to say, "You're done. You're mine now." That was the moment in the 7th when
he knew, didn't he?
Because he says he hit me, and I thought he said left me saying wide open, and I thought, oh, this is gonna hurt, and it didn't, and there were no on his shot.
He knew.
He says that was the turning point. Now go watch the 7th round, and you'll see. And he really puts his foot on gas then, because it gives you confidence, doesn't it? If you've been taking a shellacking, because he took a shellacking, didn't it? He took some hammer.
Oh, it was the first 3 rounds watching that fight. I wasn't as big a Carl Froch fan as you, but I was a fan. You know, I used to enjoy watching him. And when I saw the first 3 rounds, Groves was absolutely brilliant. I thought, who's this? This isn't George Groves. He looked like Ray Robinson. He was unbelievably sharp and accurate and
unbelievable. When I seen it, I was squeaking.
It was frightening, but as I've said, you just knew some fighters. A mate of mine, Stuart, always says about Carl Froch, he says he's a modern day Rocky Marciano. And going back to what we talked about earlier about certain fighters getting dropped, you know, we saw Rocky Marciano get dropped by Joe Walcott. He got absolutely dumped.
He was getting dumped. He was getting knocked about in that fight, wasn't he? But he got him, didn't he?
You just knew, didn't you? And because some fighters, you got to nail them to the floor to beat them. I think Fury's the same. You got to nail him to the floor. And I guess this is the point that we're saying about AJ. He'll never have that. Yes, he's been massively successful, but he'll never, ever have that, what fighters have, that resolve. You know, people will argue will say, well, hang on a minute, he beat Klitschko and he got dropped. Klitschko couldn't pull the trigger because he'd been on the sofa for 2 years. He was nearly 40 years old. He was past his best. And he just couldn't pull the trigger. You know, the Klitschko of 5 years.
We're in his 42nd year against AJ.
And if Klitschko 5 years ago would have ended that fight, he would have annihilated Joshua. Yeah, and it's just one of those things. It just doesn't have the resolve. And as I've said, Robert Garcia, Roy Jones Jr., Floyd Mayweather Jr., Senior, he can have whoever he wants in his corner. He's never going to give him that resolve that he needs. And some fighters you just know can knuckle down and come through the trenches, and some can't, and he just doesn't have it. And that's why you know that it's going to happen again. You know, that I'm not talking about the losses to, you know, Usyk. I'm talking about what happened against Andy Ruiz. Yeah. That's going to happen again. You know, there'll come a point when Joshua's in a shootout, probably when we don't expect it to be so, and he'll just cave in again, and then that will be really game over.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why they're trying to milk him while they can, don't they? Because they know he's fragile up there, don't they?
Enter, what's he called? Dempsey McKean or whatever he's called.
Dempsey McKean.
It's a perfect fight, because Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua and 258 management, Russell, they don't have to please you and they don't have to please me. They have to please the people who are prepared to pay to watch Anthony Joshua. And there are a lot of people who want to see JJ fight. And there are a lot of people who will say it's a good fight. And I always feel a bit rude when I say the casuals, but genuinely there are a lot of casuals out there who will look at a 22-0 record and they'll think that's an authentic challenge. They don't know that is a completely fabricated record. And that Dempsey McKean, for example, I think Fraser Clark will beat him tomorrow, and Fraser Clark's, you know, still doing 6-rounders.
Well, Dave Allen's ranked above Dempsey McKean.
And Dave Allen's not had a meaningful fight for years, has he?
No, he's ranked above Dempsey McKean on BoxRec.
It's a massively padded record. It's, as I've said, I don't have issues with
Fraser Clark's ranked 9 places below Dempsey McKean.
Well, Fraser Clark would stand him on his head. I mean, obviously they've got different pedigrees.
Yeah, I know, but Fraser Clark's only had a couple of fights, but
yeah, absolutely. So it's where we're at, isn't it? It's a cynical match. Of course, they're not going to bring him back in a dangerous fight, but it's just the frequency for me. I can't remember now when the fight with Usyk was, because we just get that used to watching these guys fight once a year, maybe 3 times every 2 years. That how much time off does he need? You know, how much? There's only one place that Anthony Joshua should be, and that's in competitive ring. Not train, not doing the pads with a new coach, not learning new things, not doing his S&C, not doing his Mediball slams and all this stuff that you see him doing on these little cameo videos. He needs ring time. And that's because you've heard me on like a stuck record. I've talked about the development or lack of development in AJ throughout his whole career. And he's never had that ring time. But having said all that, as I've said, I don't believe he's got what it takes to come through those tough fights anymore.
I don't. How are they going to sell this? You know, with pay-per-view and all this. How can this be pay-per-view? No belts online. A guy ranked below Dave Allen on BoxRec. How can this be pay-per-view?
I guess that's the dilemma they've got. I mean,
that card,
theatrics. I don't know, leak a few rumours of Joshua getting dropped in sparring by McKean when they sparred a few years ago. You know, we see sometimes this stuff, don't we? You know, little rumours. It's like I've said, this fight's got to have an angle to sell.
Yeah.
And is this angle Tony Sims? Is the angle that there's just something? But the whole thing, the whole matchroom, Tony Sims, Brentwood Essex, AJ 258 management, it stinks, really, does it? I'm not suggesting that the fight's not on a level. Of course, the fight's on a level, but those guys have sparred before. They know exactly what's going to happen, and they know he's a soft touch, and everybody gets paid. And the only people not happy will be you and I and the hardcore, after, you know, the day after when it's a 2-round blowout. But then again, we won't pay for it, will we?
No, we certainly won't, mate. And I just think that, looking at this from outset, him and Fury, they're further apart now than ever, aren't they?
You couldn't get further apart, could you? You've got Fury, who's obviously looking
not fighting anybody.
Yep. So maybe Fury does a unification at some point. There's rumours that the drafts have been approved. I don't know how true that. We keep hearing about contracts, don't we? We get bored of. We're going to announce something in a few days. We've sent a copy of. I mean, that's another thing, Russell. I'll go off on these tangents, but there's that little happening now in boxing that promoters and managers update the public about the exchange of contracts. Well, we sent over draft 1. You know, there's a few amendments on it. We've sent over a second draft. They're going to send it back over on Thursday morning. Friday morning, we're going to send over the third contract. There's that little happening in heavyweight boxing right now. All we hear about are contracts being exchanged. We don't want to know. Tell us a date. Tell us a location. Done. Shut up.
Yeah, it's getting boring, isn't it, Julian? Now.
Yeah, as I've said, that is literally what we talk about, is things that gonna, maybe, could have, would have, should have. He's gonna do this. He's gonna do that. I'm hoping to do this. This might happen. It's all ifs, mights, buts, and maybes, but nothing's ever concrete. And anybody who thinks I'm a cynic, you know this stat, Russell, because you quote it often. It's over 20 years, mate, since we've had a undisputed, isn't it, at heavyweight?
Yeah. The IBF have rescinded their order for Usyk to fight Ergovic, and they're agreeing that the WBA are next in line to call their mandatory for champion.
So I'm getting, who's that? Dubois,
isn't it?
I mean, so they've got to get this over the line. They've got to get the Usyk fight over the line. I'm guessing there's a time period stipulated But
Yeah.
what we do know, a little bit like with Joe Joyce and Sam Jones, we know that these so-called representatives of all these other contenders, they're just happy to get step-aside money. They're happy to get promises. They're happy to just get money for not fighting, basically. Because, you know, if I was, brings me on to Joe Joyce, if I was a representative of Joe Joyce, I don't care if I've got the same manager or the same promoter as heavyweight champion of the world. I'd be kicking and screaming right now, saying, hang on a minute, I'm 36 years old. My time is now. I want a meaningful fight for the heavyweight championship of the world now. I don't care about undisputed. I don't care about this. I don't care about that. You've got fighters like Joe Joyce that just sat on ice, aren't they? When's he going to get shot? 2 years' time?
Martin McCauley's sat on ice as well, isn't he?
Everybody's just sat on ice.
Billy Nelson's fighter. He's done well for him, Billy Nelson, hasn't he?
I know Billy. Billy's a great guy. I've known him a long time. We used to go over there, spy Ricky Burns in Scotland. He says it as it is.
What a job! Short end at stick, aren't they?
Oh, they're getting the complete shit. I mean, because people keep saying, look, the Undisputed is in the best interest of boxing. We know that, but we keep waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, whether it's AJ and Fury, whether it's Wilder, whoever it is, we keep waiting. And now we're told again that contracts are out there, contracts are exchanging hands. Here we go again. It's like Groundhog Day. So this Usyk Fury needs to get announced soon, needs to get over the line. We need a winner. And then we need all these next series of fighters like Joe Joyce. They need their opportunity because you've got people, as we just said, just sat on ice, wasting their careers away.
Porky's Corner is proud to be sponsored by Spartan Site Solutions. They are specialists in civil engineering and demolition contracts for the construction industry. Interested parties should visit their website or contact Porky's Corner for a referral at porkycorner@mail.com.